Ever wonder why the world is so intensely obsessed with Taylor Swift? It is not just her music. From a spiritual perspective, she is serving as a mirror. We are not only watching her play out her life, but we are watching her act out these universal soul lessons that we are all here working on learning. Heartbreak, love, justice, safety, and power. But to truly understand what she is here to reflect back at us, we need to look beyond the headlines. We need to look at Taylor Swift on a soul level. I have analyzed her soul age, her soul archetype, her past lives, her karmic lessons, and the mission that she is here to undertake while she is in form this go around. If you're new here, hi, I'm Jillian. I explore reincarnation and the afterlife and make spirituality practical so that you can apply it to your everyday life. And today we are going to use Taylor Swift to help illustrate how this life thing really works. Let's dig into her soul age. So if we look at Taylor Swift's trophy cabinet, right? It's easy for us to think that she is a young soul, right? That she is chasing after success and attention. But when we really pay attention to her life challenges, but also her lyrics, a new story unfolds and it becomes a lot more clear what age she really is. Taylor is a classic mature soul, or what I call a green soul. If you haven't watched my Soul Ages video, I will link it down below and at the end of this video. So mature souls or green souls are really here focusing in on relationships, both with other people, but also with the self. They're drawn into emotional intensity and the complexity of connection, and yes, the drama. So green souls are really known for their intense self-reflection. They're looking in the mirror and saying, is it me? So her song, The Anti-Hero, perfectly sums this up. Young souls won't even acknowledge that they're the problem. Old souls realize that it doesn't matter. It's those souls in between those two ages that are really looking into the role that they have to play in the relationship dynamics and dramas. This also explains Taylor Swift's relationship with her fans, right? She doesn't just want distant admiration. She wants intimacy. So that's why we see a lot of the Easter eggs and the hidden messages in a lot of her music and her music videos. She is building a massive global web of connection through her music. Let's look at her soul archetype next. For those of you who don't know what a soul archetype is, it's sort of like your career over lifetime. So perhaps you were a leader over lifetimes or a healer over lifetimes. It's the way that your particular unique blend of a soul engages with whatever it is you're here to accomplish. So for Taylor Swift, no surprise, she is a performer archetype. Now this doesn't mean that she's just here to get attention. Performer archetypes are really about bringing in light into the world and being a vessel for transformation through that performing energy. They're really about uplifting people through their presence. So for example, think about the Eras Tour. This was not just a concert. This was a massive energy exchange. She is there to perform, to lift people up so that they can feel a bit brighter and transform through the medium of her music. But while the performer is her primary archetype, she has two secondary archetypes. So the second one is the artist. So we can see that in how Taylor approaches her work. She's not simply singing. She's creating worlds right through the Easter eggs, through her work is more like poetry. She is channeling herself through her music. This is her creation, not simply a performance, but an offering to everyone. Now, the third one will surprise you, but I think she particularly would agree with this one. And that is the archetype of the advocate. So underneath the sequins, we see this steel backbone that guides her through life. The advocate is driven by a sense of justice and fairness. They want things to be done right in the world. We see this many times throughout Taylor's life. For those of you who don't know, All of her songs, all of her life's work were sold to another person without her consent, and she wasn't given the right to buy them herself. Now, for a business person, this is just a deal, right? It's just a way to make money. But to an advocate and creative, this is like a violation of their very essence. So what Taylor did is she went and re-recorded all of her songs so that she had the rights, and asked her audience to go and purchase her new song. Now, a lot of people thought this was about greed, that she wanted to make money off of her own music, which, I mean, I think that's fair enough. But really, this was about justice. This is about her owning her own creativity and therefore her own self. And we're gonna see as we dig in other ways that this advocate persona comes up, this need for justice and for righting wrongs. But she is willing to put everything on the line in order for justice and the right way to do things to prevail. Okay, so we have a mature soul, all about emotions, relationships, what's going on inside of her world, channeled through a performer, supported by her creativity and driven by her advocacy, her need for justice. But why is she dealing with the specific challenges that she is today? Why does her life look the way it looks today? To answer that, we have to look at her history. And I don't mean 2010. Let's look at her past lives. So when I profile a soul, I'm looking for things that seem a little out of place to get some clues about past lives. Here she was, a young girl in Pennsylvania. Why was she obsessed with country music? It actually put her at odds with her classmates, who then kind of made her feel like an outsider and made her feel a bit different, and really stirred up a lot of insecurity because she was judged. But nonetheless, she was passionate and committed to this idea of being a singer, a country music singer, at a very young age. And the fact that she became a singer so young is also a clue. When we find young people that hit success, right? It usually isn't because they've just managed to stir that up in this lifetime, but it's actually a continuation, that they're building on something that they've developed in a previous lifetime. So it's just sort of a continuation. It's the next chapter. They don't have to learn it all from zero because they've been doing this for a while. I stumbled across a theory from the site reincarnationresearch.com from a medium who said that Taylor Swift is the reincarnation of this woman named Florence Reese. Florence Reese was a young girl in the Appalachian Mountains who, at the age of 12, similar to our dear Taylor, wrote a famous anthem for coal miners, particularly for the coal mining labor movement. Florence spent her entire life fighting the coal barons so that the coal miners would get fairly paid. She likely died with a fire in her belly, resenting the rich and powerful. So that soul, right, didn't disappear, it was reincarnated. And if we are to look to see if this soul was reincarnated into Taylor Swift, here we are, a young woman drawn to Tennessee, looking to fight our modern day barons of Apple and Spotify, and standing up to ensure that artists get paid fairly. So you see the common themes here. In 2014, for example, she famously pulled her entire catalog from Spotify because she was not happy with the fact that artists were getting paid pennies for their music. She also wrote a letter to Apple, which she qualifies as probably the bravest thing she has ever done, at least at the time of the interview that I watched. In it, she was demanding that Apple pay artists when they were giving out the free trial periods. So we're seeing the pattern, right? Standing up to the barons, using her voice to stand up to those in power to ensure that people get paid fairly. So here's the spiritual plot twist, if you will. If Florence resented the wealthy, right, had this deep anger against the wealthy, on a soul level, she's going to want to balance that out and understand the other side of the fence. It also would make sense that Taylor then incarnated into a very wealthy family to understand that side of the life experience. And I think that Taylor was also probably rewarded, right, for all of the work that she had done helping coal miners, the fact that she was dedicating her life to justice in her past life, I think maybe made it more supported that she would get success in this life as karmic balancing or reward, I suppose. And then the other thing I think is interesting is that Florence died of a heart attack. And when you look at things on the energetic level, right, if things are happening energetically and physically, this means that the heart chakra for Florence was probably out of whack. So here we are, of course, as we look at Taylor's modern incarnation and what seems to be the biggest, most important chakra of all, the heart one. That is where she's playing out all of her dramas and traumas in this life. Okay, so Taylor Swift didn't just have one past life, right? She's a mature soul, so she's had plenty. We have a few more clues as far as other people she may have been. Maybe not their names, but maybe sort of the themes or what she was about in previous lives. You see this in her writing. She's called a confessional poet. She is obsessed with poets from the past. She's even a distant cousin of Emily Dickinson. So she isn't just writing pop songs. She's doing what she's done for centuries, which is documenting the dramas of the human heart. Other clues to some of Taylor Swift's past lives is if we look at her fears. She has a very interesting and intense fear that also shows up in her dreams of being framed and found guilty and perhaps even executed. So this is very likely to be stemmed from a past life where she was indeed found guilty for something that she didn't do and ended up giving her life for it. This would fully explain her obsession with justice. This also really gives a lot of insight as to why she's got this fear of being canceled and why she had to go through that Snake Gate incident. So for those of you who don't know what Snake Gate is, and I certainly didn't until I started diving into Taylor's history, it all began when Taylor was accepting an award and Kanye came on stage and interrupted it, saying that Beyonce should get that award. It then continued on and escalated where she had a phone conversation with Kanye and Kim Kardashian too, I think, where he was asking her permission to use her name or to reference her in her song. And she said yes. But then he went and did something pretty dramatically different than what she had agreed to. And then what happened? Well, Kim Kardashian and Kanye then edited up the phone transcript so it made it look like she did indeed agree to it and that it made her look like a liar. She was framed for something that she didn't really do. Because this came out, everybody started canceling Taylor because they thought she was a liar. They started using all of these snake emojis for her. It ended up like wounding her deeply, right? So this must have been hugely impactful and devastating to Taylor, right? Because she had this past life where she was killed probably publicly in front of a whole group of people that were cheering on her death, not understanding that it was unjust. So here she was enacting it in a less deadly way, right? That she was getting canceled, which is like a death to a celebrity, in front of a huge group of people in order to go through that again and realize that she was going to be okay, she was going to survive it, and she could be stronger because of it. But she had to go through it to get there. By the way, I'm testing this out as a new format, doing this celebrity soul analysis. Is this something that you like? Let me know. Is there another soul you would like me to analyze? Maybe Lady Gaga or Beyonce, or even like Prince Charles. Who would you like to know a little bit more about on a soul level? Okay, so we've got Florence's activism. We've got a tortured poet. We have some trauma around execution and injustice from past lives. Let's look at what Taylor Swift is up to in this life. Let's look at her soul lessons. So when we come into form, there are particular lessons that we want to learn. We set up how to learn these through going through various different challenges, and we get the people that we're in relationship in our lives to help trigger these dramas and traumas so that we can learn and grow our soul. So what is Taylor's first lesson? No surprise, it's all about love. I mean, come on, it's all about love. Now, we're seeing this play out with her in her love relationships, but really this is about her learning how to love and accept herself. We can really see this as we look back even to her childhood, from when she was a student and her classmates would make fun of her for being interested in country music and feeling like an outsider. She still carries those insecurities with her today. She's also struggled with eating disorders. She's talked about how seeing pictures of herself spins her into a hate spiral and then causes her to engage in some anorexia, which she's actively working on and hopefully has overcome. But through this all, there's this idea that she has to be perfect in order to be accepted. Now, as we look at her relationship specifically, because what we need to learn internally, we often play out in our relationships. So she's had a little variety pack of relationships that she's gone through. And we can look at the relationships themselves. We can also look at her songs and how those have told the story of her evolution when it comes to learning about connection and attachment. And as we look at these relationships too, we see that she's experienced a lot of rejection. Rejection for who she is, the fact that she's a famous person and she has all of this attention and spotlight. Who she is isn't enough for these previous boyfriends to stick with her. She's desperately wanting somebody to accept her and want her for who she is. But the lesson here for her is that she needs to learn to accept herself for how she is, just as she is, in order to open up to more love. Now, it looks like she has passed the test when it comes to that, right? After going through all of these relationships, she found Travis, right? Kelsey, the very famous relationship. He sought her out. He is not afraid of her light. He is very comfortable sharing it with her. I think it's also interesting to find out that he had a childhood crush on her and they were born only 69 days apart. This does indicate to me that this is potentially a soulmate connection, that they hopped into form at about the same time. They were hanging out in the waiting room together on the other side and jumped in a few months apart. And also the fact that he already felt called to her at such a young age tells me a little something. As I've looked through her songs and see how she's grown up and grown into maturity and grown into like powerfully accepting herself just as she is, that's when then the relationship that is here to stay comes into her life. So the second lesson that she's working on in this life, and a major lesson, is one of justice, as we've talked about in the previous sections around past lives and her soul archetype. Justice is key to what her soul is experiencing in this life. She repeatedly puts herself in the line of fire to change the industry. We see this when she wrote the letter to Apple. We see this in her battle against Spotify. We see this in the battle against the labels to have ownership over her own music. Over and over again, she stands up for what is right and makes herself vulnerable in the process. And yes, there was the incident with Kanye West and Kim Kardashian and Snakegate, but that too was about standing up for what is right, standing up against distortion and injustice. So the lesson she is learning, and I think she's doing a great job at it for what it's worth, is to stand up for what is right, even when it means that she might lose everything, because in a past life she did. Now, a third lesson that she's working on is around safety, and it's showing up really interesting in her life. It is really about safety even though she's in the public eye. Again, I think this ties into that past life where she was executed in front of a large group of people. So the spiritual paradox here is massive, right? She's a performer in the public eye who really craves privacy and just wants to hide. Her soul is learning how to be safe while being visible. This is the lesson she is still working through, I think, quite strongly. The first two, I think she's made a lot of progress on. This one seems to be the hot one because she's getting more and more famous and therefore more and more a target. So how is she going to be able to navigate her way to feeling safe even while exposed? Let's get to her sort of masterclass of a lesson, which is around feminine empowerment. So Taylor has talked about feeling like a national lightning rod for slut shaming. But she hasn't let this destroy her. In fact, she is using it. She looks up to Elizabeth Taylor for just this reason. Elizabeth Taylor also was someone who had a lot of scrutiny and criticism put upon her. But what Elizabeth did is that she took that criticism and judgment and she channeled it into her art and ended up taking even bigger risks and finding the humor in it and let it propel her forward. We see that Taylor has taken a page out of Elizabeth Taylor's books. I mean, she said that as much herself, that she's using that as an inspiration to take the criticism and create art out of it. She owns the names that she's being called. Look at the snake. She uses that as an emblem for her tour. She's owning it and not shying away from it. But her battles are not just about music rights or slut shaming or backstabbing. She has a long soul history of her voice being squashed or controlled. And now in this life, she is standing up in her voice and in her power through her singing and her presence. It is the spiritual practice of refusing to shrink just to make other people comfortable. The ultimate lesson that she's working here is embracing the criticism, putting it into her work and standing up in her power. Those were her lessons. And like I said, the very last one was very much lesson/purpose. So let's get into her purpose. To figure out someone's life purpose, it's often very useful to look at their life setup, look at their genetic setup, look at the nation that they were born into, their economic status, their family of origin, all of that. Taylor Swift has tons of clues. Genetically, she had a grandmother who was an opera singer. So there you go, looking at what body to choose, she chose one that already had a talent or predisposition to have a good singing voice. She chose a body that was physically attractive, which makes it easier on the national stage, particularly when you're dealing with a lot of your life lessons through the lens of romance. She also was born a Capricorn. Capricorns are very hardworking and they're very much focused on success and their career. So that also provided her with a foundation for what she was going to build. And economically, she chose a family that's the perfect incubator. She was born to very well-off parents. She had horses as a little girl. She was living a good life. Right? Again, in a past life, she had a lot of resentment towards the wealthy. Well, in this life, she got to see firsthand what it was like. But that wealth was able to help support her in her singing career and was what allowed her to get started so young. And there's clearly karmic debt at play here because her parents didn't just support her, they rearranged their entire lives for her. They actually moved to Tennessee so that she could pursue country music. And then also her father financially invested in her early music career in a pretty substantial way. So her parents likely signed up before birth to help be her launch pad. There was some balancing, something that they owed Taylor Swift, that they signed up in full force to help her as she got going on this purpose. And get going she did. She got started at 11 years old. What were you doing at 11? She was singing Dolly Parton covers and getting rejected by music labels. Now, it was through this rejection and doing other people's covers that she, in looking at the other famous artists, famous female artists that she really looked up to, she realized she needed to start creating her own music. So this rejection was very important in fostering her creativity and who she was going to be in this world, not simply a singer, but an artist. So what is her mission and her purpose? It is not simply to be a singer and performer. She's actually here to help us look at the feminine archetype and really pull forward a lot of those shadow aspects of the feminine and bring some light into it. And as I talked about in the empowerment lesson, she's showing us how there can be power in vulnerability, how when we stand up for ourselves, that we can actually create even more and be even more brilliant and bright through owning the criticism that's thrown at us. She is showing us what it looks like to claim your narrative when everyone wants to write it for you. And that you don't have to earn love by being perfect. You earn it by being authentically, powerfully yourself. And here's the thing, she's still alive, so she's still got work to do. I think we're gonna continue to see her go through challenges around justice and injustice, around love, around safety, and around feminine empowerment. So Taylor Swift is a perfect example of a mature green soul. Are you curious if you're a mature soul or perhaps even an old soul? Well, check out this video where I go through the 5 stages of soul ages, break it down so you can figure out where you are at and what you're working on in this incarnation. I'll see you there.